Hey everybody, welcome back. It is Alexandra Hare. That's me, the founder of Optimum Joy, and Alex Parlette, one of my coworkers, a therapist at Optimum Joy who primarily sees couples and emerging young adults, is back. And ACP, why don't you go ahead and just introduce our topic for us? What are we going to be kind of like noodling on together today?
Yeah, so today I thought it'd be great if we talked a little bit more about validation, specifically like within couples. A lot of the work that I do in couples stems around how do we show each other validation, which just to define it within kind of couples therapy, validation within partners really is just communicating understanding and understanding and acceptance. Understanding that you're listening and that you're hearing the person talk, and acceptance in the moment that you're accepting what they hear, what they're saying to you. So just communicating understanding and acceptance.
Okay, so essentially it's not necessarily like, if sometimes when I think what it is, I sometimes think what it is not as part of like defining it. And essentially you're also saying that it's partly it's not agreeing, it's not just like full-fledged, taking on what somebody is saying. It's more just kind of like I can actually attune to you in a moment and understand where you're coming from.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
And why, I mean, like, why is that even important?
Yeah. A lot of times when I'm working with couples, a common theme that I hear is the other person, the partner, they're not listening to me. They don't understand what I'm saying. They're not hearing me. I don't feel heard. That
Yeah.
statement a lot. I don't feel heard. Well, the best way to kind of have a couple interact with each other and make sure that both of them are feeling heard is through validation.
Mhm.
And so if that just is one of the partners saying, hey, like, I feel frustrated right now,
Mhm.
right? Instead of the other partner responding with a defensive remark or trying to just defend their side of things, I'll tell them, don't even respond with what you think, right? Because the other person just communicated to you a feeling that they have.
Yeah.
And a feeling is valid.
Mhm.
And therefore that feeling needs to be validated.
Mhm.
And so that response can look like, I'm sorry that you feel frustrated right now, right? And just that first part of that response shows, I understand that you're telling me that you're frustrated. I hear you say that you're frustrated right now, right? So that active listening, that engaging, right? And just being able to respond in that way, it can create a safe zone, a
Yeah.
safe area for the couples to be able to communicate with each other.
This is making so much sense to me in the sense, ACP, about how, you and I obviously go to school as counselors and we like learn that listening is like of prime importance, right? But I,
Right.
I think we're like a little biased towards listening. But
Mm,
hearing what you're saying about the example of being like frustrated and it being an emotion and
mhm.
how that is supposed to lead to just more safety in the relationship. I'm even just thinking how our brains work, that like the emotional center of our brain, our amygdala, is actually what like essentially translates information, and it won't actually shut off of fight or flight or numb out or different stages until it
Mhm.
actually feels safe. So I
Mhm.
would imagine that like if I'm sitting here, like if we were to pretend that like you're my partner and I'm saying I feel frustrated, and all you do is defensively respond to me like,
Mhm.
well, I didn't mean to do that, or like you're like putting words in my mouth or all this different stuff, I would not yet calm down in my system because I'd be like,
Right.
he still doesn't understand that I'm frustrated. Dang it. you know?
Mhm.
So I can kind of see from like a neuroscience and safety and how like listening, not the act of agreement, but like the act of listening and validating is
Mhm.
super important. Now,
Yeah.
can I just ask, what about couples who are like, oh yeah, we do validating talk when they're essentially like screaming at each other, like not screaming, but they're still obviously not really validating. It's kind of like, I hear that you're frustrated, where it's not like, okay, I see that you're frustrated. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What would you
Yeah.
kind of,
I would actually challenge them and say, do you actually hear what the other person is saying? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, you hear that they're frustrated, right? But what else? Are you actually listening? Um, the Gottman Institute, right, for couples therapy, they have this cool exercise where they'll actually have like one partner have a clipboard with a piece of paper and the other and a pen, and they're just listening to the other person talk, and they're writing down what the other person is saying, and then when the partner's done talking, they repeat back, I heard you say, right, and the motions, the feelings, all the different things that the partner just said, they just repeat back,
Mm-hmm.
right? Showing them that, hey, I actually did hear you, right? I'm not responding defensively. I'm not getting in my own words to be able to respond. I'm choosing to respond in this moment by just saying what I heard you say,
Mm-hmm.
and truly show that understanding. And then you switch, right? And then the other partner becomes the listener, and the partner who was a listener becomes the talker,
Yeah.
right? um, and like just really challenging them to truly listen, right? Because if you're truly listening, you'll get your turn to talk, right? But if
You'll
you're truly listening, yeah.
you'll earn yeah.
So yeah, but like just like different exercises like that, to see if they're actually listening to each other.
Yeah. It's reminding me of, I don't know if I would have ever passed this podcast on to you. I know you would have been super interested in it, but Dax Shepard has, I think it's like the Armchair Expert or whatever,
Okay.
as a
Heard
podcast.
of, heard of the podcast. I don't think I've listened to it though.
I can't think of what the actual title is, but if you just look up Dax Shepard podcast, you find it. But he has Dr. Gottman, who you're referencing for this
Okay.
exercise, on as his guest. And they have this long conversation about like couples work and what it means to be a couple and stages of life and stuff. But he tells a story where him and his wife were at a conference and they just had a few hours to kill in their hotel room, So he was like, he's like, babe, tell me where you're at. Like, what's going on in your life? What are you thinking about? And she kind of looks at him like, well, if I tell you, you have to just like shut up and listen. Like, you're not allowed to say anything. But you kind of hear like, oh gosh, like, but essentially, I think that I can't remember what he says about their relationship dynamic, but he goes on to essentially say that, so I just took out a piece of paper, which is exactly what you're describing,
Mhm.
and I just started listening. And 2.5 hours later, she was done talking. And I feel like I learned again after being with my wife for a bunch of years that it's like, oh, you do have a lot going on in you. And I feel like I've come to know who you are just by like listening. So part of that, I think it is actually important for the person who's listening to not put their information into the mix until it's actually their turn.
Well, and a lot of times with couples too, if you're in a conflict, right, you're not necessarily actively listening, you're listening to respond,
Ooh, yeah.
right? And so in that technique that Dr. Gottman talks about, right, if you are writing down and focused on writing down what you hear, you can't necessarily have your brain also be thinking about, what do I need to say to respond to this, right? Your brain is truly focusing on, what is the person saying so I can write this down.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And so it's just an active way to help teach the couple how to truly actively listen with,
Mm-hmm.
and not just listen to respond.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I really, I'm sitting here thinking that like just because you have a time of validation or like affirmative listening doesn't mean that's how couples talk 24/7.
Right.
Like I think that that's sometimes where couples, they're like, we're doing the skill because after everything somebody says, they're implementing it into their daily lives. But in a way, well,
Mm,
I guess what would you say about that? What do you think is like a good amount of just normal conversation versus this kind of like validation affirmation? And maybe I'm not asking the question in the exact right way, so feel free to respond with whatever you're thinking.
yeah. I think usually, right, when couples are coming in, it most of the time you would say probably because there's some high conflict going on. And so in those moments of high conflict, like how can we get that energy level that's way up here back down to here so that you can communicate effectively with each other,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
And So by doing an exercise like this, or by trying to implement validation and validating remarks in the moment of that high conflict, at first it's going to be really hard, right? Because you're maybe stuck in your ways of how you communicate with each other. And so at first it might be, all right, hey, let's just pause for a second, walk away, let's calm down, let's come back. And when you come back, let's practice the validating communication. And then hopefully, maybe over time, as you continue to build this skill, you can activate it in the moment, right? Um, and then instead of those high conflict moments that usually become high conflicts because, again, you're not listening to each other, you're not truly hearing the other person, and then you have just a screaming fest back and forth, right? You know, it happens in the office. I'm sure you've seen it with couples before too, right? And then afterwards, you know, I kind of just pause and I say, so what did the other person actually say? And they don't know, right?
I
Your defenses are up. Your defenses are up, and you were just responding to defend yourself.
don't know. Mhm.
And so it's how can we get those high conflict moments not only to diminish or lower, but how can we recognize we're in one of those moments to be able to first step away to calm ourselves down and then come back to finish the conversation by using some of these skills and by using validation and validating remarks.
Yeah. No, that's making so much sense. And I guess on the flip side, part of this is just, this is pretty advanced. This can feel advanced for couples who are stuck in a pattern. And I
Mm,
think that sometimes to really do this, going back to kind of like some of the brain science stuff, I would imagine that individuals within a couplehood, the individuals also have to kind of do some emotion regulation. They also have to kind of like within their own, kind of like system in their brains and in their bodies, like feel safe. So
yeah.
things like taking a deep breath or like taking a time out and like walking around the block or like drinking a cold glass of water, like really simple things that it's like, oh, how can I actually reconnect with my own self and feel safe in my own skin so I
Yep.
can do this really kind of like a serving and connecting skill,
Mm,
you know,
yeah.
thinking. So, I know you already said a few of them, Alex, but what's like, give us some examples of validating responses. Just if you could like check off a few of them, about
Yeah.
what to give people a sense of what it sounds like.
Yeah. And so I use the frustration one first, right? Of saying one of the partners says, hey, like, I'm feeling really frustrated right now. Um, and they might give a reason, right? And then in response, the validating response would be, I hear that you're frustrated right now, right? You can even add an apology in there, right? Of like, I hear that you're frustrated right now, and I'm sorry. That was not my intent.
Hmm.
Not going into what your intent was, right? Because then you're responding more, but just leaving it at the validating response of, I hear that you're frustrated, and I'm sorry, that wasn't my intent, or just I'm sorry that you're feeling frustrated,
Yeah.
right? And that type of response is showing that understanding, right? Of I understand that this is how you're feeling right now, and I'm accepting that in this situation with you, you are frustrated
Hmm.
currently, right? Um, I mean, you pick your emotion, and let's see if I can give you a validating
Oh
response.
yeah. I mean, anger is classic. I'm so
Sure.
angry. um,
Yeah.
I think disconnected is a word that I don't know, would you say that this is true? Like,
Yeah.
especially maybe if we think in a stereotypically heterosexual relationship where gender norms are relatively traditional, that you often have women pretty
Mm,
frequently saying, I just feel disconnected. I just want to connect. I want us to like connect. So if she's saying, I feel disconnected
yeah.
from you.
So in that response, it could be like, I hear that you're saying that you feel like we've been distant from each other, and that maybe I haven't been totally available recently, and I'm sorry that you feel that way. I,
Hmm.
I really want to be more available to
Hmm. Yeah, that's nice. That's really nice. That's a good response.
you.
Oh, I would imagine what's really hard about this is when people express emotions in a relationship, it's often with the person who means so much to them.
Mm,
So if, like, let's take that example, for instance, if someone's saying, I feel so disconnected from you, it
mm,
could just be, I'm saying that because I actually want to connect.
mhm.
But sometimes in defensiveness, it can be heard as, oh, she thinks there's a problem with me, or I'm
Yeah.
not doing enough, or
Mhm.
she doesn't think that I am enough. Some of those kind of like primal abandonment,
Make enough
rejection,
husband.
yeah, disappointment,
Mhm.
all kind of those like softer things. And I think it's important for the person who is in the listening to still be in tune with the like, oh, that made me really sad. Or I felt
Mhm.
kind of angry. Even if they don't say it in that moment, it's going to be probably pretty important for them to track with their own emotional process so that
Yep.
when the roles are flipped, they also can access that emotion for connection or to like deepen the relationship in a way.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, you know, what this kind of, it actually makes me think of something like within the religious context that I don't want to go there, but I gotta get it out of my mind. But just like thinking through how some people think, oh, well, if I just, oh, I see you're frustrated, if they respond in a reflexive way, that maybe means I accept and own that you're frustrated and that it's my fault, or that it's,
Yeah.
that it's like, if I am just going to track with you in conversation, that means that I agree, I accept everything. How is it not equal to acceptance?
Yeah. And and that's a great question. That's a great point that a lot of couples will bring up, right? A lot of partners will bring up and say, like, well, what if I don't fully accept that, like, I'm the reason that caused all of this, right? But I'm showing the validation for it. And the, the easy way to respond to that, and what I always say is that, like, look, a feeling is a feeling, right? The other person is feeling it for a reason,
Mhm.
right? Whether you agree with that reason or not, you can still validate the feeling,
Yeah.
right? You can validate the feeling without accepting the feeling as your own, right? And accepting the cause of it, but you can still validate it.
Hmm.
Now, it doesn't mean you communicate that you don't accept the cause of it, right? You just communicate that validation to them.
Hmm. Yeah. You know what's reminded me of ACP? Dan Siegel he does a lot of basically brain research and has translated into mostly parents working with kids, but he has this video called Name It to Tame It, and
Okay.
a skill. And it's not the same as what you're talking about here, because what you're talking about here is like specific language and techniques and stuff within like a couple's context and you as a couple's therapist.
Sure.
But he talks about it as like name it to tame it, how um seeing, acknowledging, recognizing an emotion, which really, like emotions that are hard, it basically shuts off our thinking, logical, strategic brain because of the emotions and puts us down into kind of our reactive, body responsive brain
Mhm.
in a way. So, like, it's just going to be reactive, reactive, reactive. And the way to basically reintegrate that system and get back into your thinking brain is in a way to like name it. So if someone is helping you by saying, oh, you're feeling like we're disconnected, it doesn't even have to be owning any part of it. It can just say, oh, like,
Yeah.
I see that you're feeling like we're not connecting, that just in of itself, that calms that emotion brain and brings like the front logical brain back online. So like in high conflict couples, how like maybe doing this will just really simmer it down a little
It
bit.
creates that feeling of safety with the
Yep,
other person, right?
yep,
That, hey, it is safe for me to come to you with these things, right? It is safe for me to be vulnerable with you as my partner. Yeah.
right. All things that we would really want with the people that we're in relationship with. So ultimately, like, I mean, I'm hearing you say listening's important, affirming's important, but like, why? What's the whole point of it all? Like, what does it produce in a relationship? What's the impact of it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think, well, what it produces is, again, I think more of that safety, that safe space to continue a conversation and actually get to a point where maybe you're finding a resolution, right? Instead of just without the validation, you're just the level of energy is up here and you're screaming back and forth at each other. There's no one wins,
It's
right? It doesn't end.
true.
And so when you can bring that energy back down here, right? When you can show those validating remarks to each other, right? It goes both ways. You're creating that space to where you can just communicate at this level, not be screaming at each other, and maybe find a resolution as to what's going on, right? Your example of when you said you felt disconnected, right? And in that, the response that I gave, an easy segue could be, what can we do so that we feel more connected with each other, right?
Yep.
That's the conversation that a woman who might say that wants, right? Or even a man who has that feeling, right? That's the conversation they want to have. What can we do to feel more connected again?
Right.
But if we're up here, right, and we hear that, and then we just start screaming at each other, it's like, well, you're always gone too, right? And all of those things, you're never going to finish the conversation. You're never going to come to a sort of an agreement.
Right.
But again, if we can keep that level down, if you can feel safe through those validating remarks, it can lead to actually finishing the discussion and coming up with a plan, right, to make the other person feel better, to make both of you feel better.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would imagine too, I'm just thinking of different times that, I've been in a relationship or another, whether a friendship or a romantic one, where when I actually listened more than spoke, it did actually feel good on my end. Like, I feel like I can almost like testify to the fact that it's like, oh, to put myself aside for a moment and just like listen
Mm-hmm.
did actually feel good on my behalf because it was someone that I really loved and cared about too. I think
Yeah.
that sometimes we forget that the partner who we're in conflict with is literally the person who also like we love and cherish. That's the reason I think it becomes so painful and conflict escalates is because the other person actually really matters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, and I guess the last, just hearing you say safety, trust, closeness, I think also what's kind of resonating with me is just remembering that one conversation doesn't have to be the end.
Mm.
Do you know what I'm saying? It's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, what if like me and my partner are in conflict? I do the validating listen, I do the validation piece where I'm listening, I'm absorbed, all this different stuff. But then like, we were driving to, I don't know, a potluck or like a friend's house for dinner or something like that. And we get there and there's not practically space for him to then listen to me. It doesn't mean you're not going to have the car ride home or the next, like really kind of thinking of like a relationship and this type of conversation as like an ongoing, as we learn more and see each other more, it just kind of like continues to roll out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have to finish, right?
Yeah.
It can continue whenever the time makes sense.
Exactly. Here's what I mean, I'm just loving all the things that you're saying because I think you gave some like really practical skills for couples. Essentially, like write down, like take some time and write down and like build the skill before you can like naturally almost separate yourself from the situation and listen. Because part
Yeah.
of this is like the skill of differentiation. How can two people be close but different?
Yeah.
Um, the idea of being like safe partners,
Mhm.
and some of those like specific responses. I'm sure that too, if someone would just to like literally Google validating responses in
Mhm.
conflict, I bet that a whole list of examples and stuff would come up. Uh,
Yeah.
but that ultimately, like what you're talking about and what you do with couples in your work as a therapist is essentially making them a safe partner or like a safe harbor that like
Yeah.
strong emotion and like attachment and all this different stuff can kind of like tuck in and be safe. So
Right.
I love that.
Yeah.
Love it. Any kind of like final thoughts or last closing comments before we head out for the day?
No, I think I love working with couples, right? And so it's just really interesting to see the different dynamics that couples will bring in. And sometimes like the validating responses seems just like such a foreign concept, right? And so it can take a few sessions or a while to get that, right? But one thing I always try to communicate too is like, even though you might not think the other person deserves it, we really need to try to give the benefit of the doubt as we continue to work through this, meaning giving the person the benefit of the doubt that they will respond with validation, that they will respond in the appropriate way. And if they don't, it's not the end of the world, right? Because we're growing, right? But give them the benefit of the doubt. Try to be vulnerable. And that goes on both sides, right? But
Yeah.
give them the benefit of the doubt.
Almost they, like you or I or anyone else, are trying to do the best they possibly can.
Yeah.
And that maybe there's room for improvement with the best
Yep.
they can do, but you gotta
Yep.
start somewhere.
Which is why
So,
you're in therapy, right? Which is you're
awesome.
wanting to build that relationship back up. So it can take time.
I love that. Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Alex. Just to kind of like repeat some of your information, that you work at Optimum Joy. You're a couples and emerging young adult therapist around just like couples work generally speaking, but also, the last time you were on here, you talked about porn misuse, as more of like an addictive substance. And, really, I don't probably do a good enough job of even just saying on here that like you actually have written quite a few like articles and posts and stuff like that on our website. And that if people
Yeah.
actually your bio page, that at the very bottom, like all of your posts are linked there
Mhm.
around couples work, and just kind of some of the stuff you've actually talked about on here. So if anybody's really looking to, see growth from the perspective of Alex as a therapist, that's probably a good
Yeah.
place to go. So, but I
Yeah.
appreciate having you on here.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. See you soon.
Bye.